Ian was not looking for anything that morning. He was just passing through the old ruins on his way to the next village, his worn boots crunching over broken stone and dry leaves. The ruins were not much, just crumbled walls, fallen arches, and patches of pale grass pushing up through the cracks. People in the nearby village said the place was empty. They said nothing lived there anymore. They were wrong. Ian heard the sound first. A small, scratching noise, like claws on rough stone. He slowed his steps and looked around. The morning light was still thin and gray, and the shadows between the old walls were long and deep. He waited. He listened. Then he saw it. In the far corner, where two broken walls met and made a narrow shelter, a small dragon hatchling was curled up on the bare ground. It was tiny, no bigger than a large dog, with dull gray scales that blended almost perfectly with the stone around it. Its wings were folded tight against its back, and its tail was wrapped around its body like it was trying to take up as little space as possible. But what caught Ian's eye was not the hatchling. It was what the hatchling was holding. Clutched between its two front claws, pressed close to its chest, was a small toy plane. It was cracked down the middle, one wing bent the wrong way, the paint worn off in long strips. It looked like something a child had once loved and lost. It looked like it had been through a great deal. But the hatchling held it with both claws as if it were made of something precious, as if letting go of it would mean losing the last good thing in the world. Ian stood very still. He had seen dragon hatchlings before, but always with their kin, always near older dragons who watched with sharp eyes and low rumbles. He had never seen one alone. He had never seen one so small and so quiet, sitting by itself in a cold ruin with nothing but a broken toy for company. He looked around slowly. There were no other dragons. No adults watching from the shadows, no siblings wrestling nearby. Just this one small creature, alone, holding its broken thing. The hatchling had not noticed him yet. It was looking down at the toy plane, turning it slightly with its claws, the way a child might look at something they did not fully understand but could not bring themselves to put down. One claw traced the crack along the body of the plane, slow and careful. Then it stopped. Then it did it again. Like it was hoping the crack might be gone this time. It was not gone. Ian shifted his boot and a small stone scraped under his heel. The hatchling's head snapped up. Its eyes were pale yellow, wide and sharp, and they locked onto Ian with a speed that made him go very still. For a long moment neither of them moved. The hatchling's claws tightened around the toy plane, pulling it closer. Its small chest rose and fell quickly. It was frightened. But it did not run. Ian did not move either. He kept his hands loose at his sides. He kept his face calm. He did not step forward, did not step back. He just stood there in the early morning light and let the hatchling look at him for as long as it needed to. The hatchling watched him with those pale yellow eyes, its body low, its wings pressed flat. It looked like it was ready to bolt at any moment. But it stayed. And Ian noticed something. Even while it watched him, even while every part of it was coiled and tense and ready to run, it did not let go of the toy plane. Both claws stayed wrapped around it, tight and sure. Whatever else happened, whatever this strange tall creature standing in the ruins meant to do, the hatchling was not putting the plane down. Ian looked at the small broken toy. He looked at the small creature holding it. He thought about the crack running down the middle of the plane. He thought about the bent wing. He thought about the way the hatchling had been tracing that crack over and over with one careful claw, like it was looking for a way to undo it. Slowly, quietly, Ian lowered himself and sat down on a nearby stone. He was not in a hurry. He had no reason he could name, no plan forming in his head. He just felt, very simply, that this was not the kind of thing you walked away from. So he stayed. Ian came back the next morning. He did not know exactly why. He told himself it was because the village was still a half-day's walk away and there was no great hurry. He told himself the ruins were a fine enough place to rest for a while. But the truth, if he was being honest with himself, was simpler than that. He kept thinking about the hatchling and the broken plane. He stopped at the edge of the ruins and looked toward the corner where the two broken walls met. At first he saw nothing. Just stone and shadow and pale morning light. Then he looked more carefully and he saw it, two small pale yellow eyes, low to the ground, watching him from the dark. The hatchling was still there. Ian unslung his pack and crouched down slowly. He had brought food this time. Nothing much, just some dried meat and a piece of flat bread he had left over from the night before. He set it down on a flat stone, about halfway between himself and the corner where the hatchling was hiding. Then he stood up, stepped back several paces, and sat down on the same stone he had used the day before. He did not look directly at the hatchling. He looked at the sky instead. A few birds moved in slow circles high above the ruins. The morning was quiet and cool. Ian pulled his coat a little tighter and waited. For a long time nothing happened. Then he heard it. A soft scrape of claws on stone. Very slow. Very careful. He kept his eyes on the sky. Another scrape. Closer this time. Then silence. Then one more small sound, and then nothing again. Ian did not move. He did not turn his head. He sat the way a person sits when they have nowhere to be and nothing pressing on their mind, easy and still and unthreatening. After a while he heard the sound of something being sniffed at. A pause. Then the quiet noise of eating. He smiled but did not look. When he finally did glance over, the food was gone and the hatchling was back in its corner, watching him with those pale yellow eyes. The broken plane was still held close to its chest, same as before. Ian gave a small nod, picked up his pack, and left. He came back the next morning. And the morning after that. Each day he brought a little food. Each day he set it down on the flat stone and stepped back and sat and waited. Each day the hatchling crept out a little sooner than the day before. It was not a fast thing. It was not a smooth thing. Some mornings the hatchling came forward easily and some mornings it pressed itself back into the shadows and watched him for a long time before moving at all. Ian never pushed. He never called out to it or tried to move closer. He just came, left the food, sat down, and waited. On the fifth morning the hatchling did not go back to its corner after eating. It sat down on the ground about 3 steps from the flat stone and looked at Ian. Ian looked back at it. They stayed like that for a while, just looking at each other in the quiet morning. The hatchling tilted its head slightly to one side. Ian tilted his head slightly to one side as well. The hatchling made a very small sound, low in its throat. Ian had no idea what it meant. But he kept his face easy and open and said nothing. On the 7th morning Ian sat down and the hatchling walked straight out of its corner and sat down close, closer than it ever had before, and ate without watching him the whole time. It still watched him. But it looked away sometimes now. That felt like something. On the 8th morning everything changed. The hatchling came out as usual. Ian had set the food down and stepped back and sat. But the hatchling did not go to the food first. It walked toward Ian instead, slow and careful, and stopped a short distance away. Then it lifted both its front claws. In them was the broken toy plane. It held the plane out toward Ian, not letting go of it, but offering it, stretching it forward in a way that was so clear and so simple that Ian felt something catch in his chest. The hatchling looked at the plane, then looked at Ian, then looked at the plane again. It was asking. Ian leaned forward slowly and looked at the broken plane in those small careful claws. The cracked body, the bent wing, the worn paint. He looked up at the hatchling's pale yellow eyes. He said quietly, "I can fix this." Ian did not rush. He set his pack down on the flat stone and opened it slowly, the way a person opens something when they want the one watching them to see that there is nothing to be afraid of. The hatchling sat a few steps away, very still, the broken toy plane resting in its claws. Its pale yellow eyes followed every movement Ian made. Ian took out a small roll of cloth from his pack. Inside it were a few simple tools. A thin blade, a flat piece of metal, a small pot of thick resin he used for mending gear on long journeys, and a length of fine cord. He laid each one out on the stone beside him, one at a time, placing them carefully so they did not clatter or scrape. The hatchling flinched at the first small sound. Ian paused and waited. The hatchling settled. Ian continued. When everything was laid out he looked at the hatchling and held out one open hand. The hatchling looked at his hand. It looked at his face. Then, very slowly, it leaned forward and set the broken toy plane into his palm. Ian felt how gently it let go. He turned the plane over in his hands and looked at it properly for the first time. It was a small thing, light and old, made of some kind of pale wood and thin metal. The crack ran from the nose all the way down the body, deep and wide in the middle. One wing was bent sharply the wrong way, and the other had a small piece missing from its tip. The paint was almost entirely gone, just faint traces of red and white in the deeper grooves. It had been broken for a long time. Ian set it down on the flat stone in front of him and picked up the thin blade. He began cleaning out the crack first, very slowly, running the blade along it to clear out the dust and grit that had packed into it over time. He worked in small careful movements, not pressing hard, just clearing the way. He talked while he worked. He did not talk about anything important. He just talked the way a person talks when they want the room to feel less quiet. He said things like, "This crack goes pretty deep, but that is all right," and, "The wing is bent but the metal is not broken, that is the important part." He kept his voice low and even, the same tone the whole time, unhurried and calm. The hatchling crept closer. Ian noticed but did not stop or look up. He kept working and kept talking. The hatchling moved until it was sitting right beside the stone, close enough that Ian could hear the small sound of its breathing. Its eyes were fixed on his hands with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable, like nothing else in the world existed except those hands and the broken thing they were working on. Ian began applying the resin to the crack. He used a small flat piece of metal to press it in carefully, working from one end to the other, making sure it filled the space evenly. He held it together with steady pressure and counted to himself without speaking. The resin was slow but it was strong. He had used it many times before on boots and belts and broken pack frames. It would hold. The hatchling leaned in so close that Ian could feel the warmth coming off its scales. He moved on to the wing. This was the harder part. He worked the bent metal back slowly, a little at a time, feeling where the resistance was and easing it rather than forcing it. Once or twice he stopped and looked at it from different angles. The hatchling's head moved with him each time, tilting to match the angle he was looking from, as if it was trying to understand what he was seeing. Ian almost smiled. He used the fine cord to hold the wing in place while the resin on the body finished setting. Then he sat back and looked at the plane for a long moment. He picked it up and turned it over. He ran his thumb along the sealed crack. He tested the wing gently. It held. He looked at the hatchling and held the plane up between them, whole and straight, the crack sealed, the wing level, the small broken thing made right again. The hatchling stared at it. Then it made a sound. A soft, low sound, unlike anything Ian had heard from it before. Not a hiss, not a growl, not the small wary noises it made when it was unsure. This was something else. Something open and unguarded, rising slowly in its throat like a question that had just found its answer. Ian set the plane down gently on the stone between them. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Ian woke before the sun came up. The ruins were dark and cold and the sky above them was still the deep blue of very early morning. He sat up slowly and looked across to the corner where the hatchling slept. It was curled tight, the toy plane held against its chest the same way it always was, its tail wrapped around its body, its small sides rising and falling in slow sleep. Ian watched it for a moment. Then he began to pack up quietly. He had been thinking about this since the night before, since the moment he had held the repaired plane up and seen the look in the hatchling's eyes. The plane was fixed. But fixing it had only been half of something. The other half was still waiting. He needed open space. He needed sky. When the hatchling stirred and opened its pale yellow eyes, Ian was already standing with his pack on his back. He looked at the hatchling and then looked toward the far end of the ruins where a narrow gap in the broken wall opened onto the fields beyond. He looked back at the hatchling again. He started walking slowly toward the gap. He did not call to the hatchling. He did not gesture or make any sound. He just walked, slow and easy, the way he always moved around it. He heard a soft scrape of claws behind him after a moment and he kept walking without looking back. The hatchling was following. They came out of the ruins into the open air just as the first pale light was beginning to spread across the bottom of the sky. The field was wide and flat, full of low grass still wet with the night. The tree line ran along the far edge, dark and quiet. The air was cool and smelled like earth and morning. Ian walked out to the middle of the field and stopped. He turned around. The hatchling had stopped at the edge of the ruins, standing in the gap in the broken wall, looking out at the open space with wide eyes. It had probably never been out in the open like this. The ruins had been its whole world. Ian could see it looking left and right, taking in the flat ground, the wide sky, the long empty distance in every direction. Ian crouched down and held out the toy plane. The hatchling looked at him. Then it looked at the plane. Then it stepped out of the ruins and walked across the wet grass toward him, slow and careful, watching where it put its claws. When it reached him it stopped and looked up at his face. Ian stood up. He held the plane up above his head, angled it slightly, and looked at the hatchling. Then he looked out across the field. Then he looked at the plane again. He was trying to show it something without words, because he had no words it would understand. Then he let the plane go. It caught the morning air and glided out in a long, clean arc, smooth and level, dipping only slightly as it went. It sailed away from them across the wet grass, turning very gently to one side, riding the air for a long beautiful moment before it finally touched down softly in the grass about 30 steps away. The hatchling did not move for one full second. Then it ran. It scrambled after the plane with everything it had, claws churning through the wet grass, wings half open for balance, making small urgent sounds. It reached the plane and stopped over it, looking down at it in the grass, breathing hard. Then it picked it up carefully in both claws and turned around and ran back to Ian just as fast. It shoved the plane toward him. Ian laughed. He could not help it. It was a quiet laugh, surprised out of him. He took the plane and held it up again and released it, and the hatchling was off before it even landed, tearing across the field, stumbling once and catching itself, diving for the plane the moment it touched the grass. They did it again. And again. The sun came up slowly over the tree line and filled the field with pale gold light. The hatchling ran and chased and brought the plane back each time, and each time it was a little faster, a little more sure of its claws, a little less stumbling. Ian did not notice the dragons at first. They were at the tree line, 3 of them, large and still, standing among the dark trees and watching. He did not know how long they had been there. They were not moving. They were not making any sound. They were just watching the small gray hatchling run laughing circles around the tall quiet human in the middle of the golden field. Not one of them looked away. Ian saw the elder dragon move first. She was the largest of the 3 at the tree line, with dark green scales that caught the morning light like old stone catches rain. She was not young. That much was clear in the way she moved, slow and deliberate, each step placed with the kind of care that comes not from weakness but from long habit of knowing exactly where you are going. She walked out from the trees and across the field toward them, and the other two dragons stayed where they were and watched. The hatchling saw her coming and went completely still. It stood in the grass with the toy plane held in both claws and its eyes fixed on the elder dragon. Ian could see the change in it immediately. The loose happy scrambling of a moment ago was gone. It stood straight and small and very quiet, the way a young thing stands when something very old and very large comes close. Ian stayed where he was. He did not step back. He did not step forward. He stood in the morning light with his hands loose at his sides and watched the elder dragon come. She was big enough that he could feel the ground carry the weight of her steps before she was even close. Her eyes were deep amber, steady and unblinking, and when she looked at him he felt the full weight of them. She stopped a short distance away. For a long moment she looked at Ian. Not with anger. Not with warning. She looked at him the way someone looks at a thing they are trying to understand, turning it over in their mind, measuring it against everything they already know. Ian met her eyes and kept his face calm and said nothing. Then she looked down at the hatchling. Her expression, if a dragon's face could be said to carry one, shifted into something quieter. Something that had no threat in it at all. She looked at the small gray hatchling standing in the wet grass with the toy plane pressed to its chest, and she was still for a long time. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and deep, and it seemed to come from somewhere further away than her chest, the way thunder seems to come from further away than the sky. She spoke in the old dragon tongue, slow and measured, and Ian understood none of the words. But he understood the weight of them. He understood that something formal was happening, something that had been a long time coming. The hatchling's eyes went wide. The elder dragon spoke for a short while, and then she stopped and the field was quiet again except for the wind moving through the grass. She looked at the hatchling and waited. The hatchling looked up at her. Then it looked at Ian. Then it looked back at her and made a sound, small and clear, like an answer. The elder dragon dipped her great head once. Ian did not know all of what had passed between them. But he knew enough. He had heard the word the elder dragon had used most, the word that sat at the center of everything she had said, the word she had returned to at the end. He had heard it clearly each time. Ash. He looked at the hatchling, at Ash, and something settled in his chest, quiet and certain, like a stone finding the bottom of still water. Ash was looking at him now. Those pale yellow eyes were full of something Ian had not seen in them before. Not wariness. Not hunger. Not the careful measuring look of a creature deciding whether to trust. This was different. This was the look of something that had just been given a place in the world and was still getting used to the size of it. Ian crouched down slowly. He held out the toy plane. Ash stepped forward and took it, and Ian kept hold of it for just one moment longer, both of them holding it together in the morning light, the repaired plane between his hands and Ash's small careful claws. Then Ian let go. He looked at Ash and said quietly, "Keep it flying." He stood up. He looked once at the elder dragon, gave a small respectful nod, and she returned it, slow and certain. Then he picked up his pack, turned, and began to walk away across the field. He did not look back. Behind him he heard a sound. A rush of air, light and quick, like something catching wind for the very first time. He stopped walking without meaning to. Then he smiled and kept going. Because he knew what that sound was. Ash had opened its wings.